Okay, can you hear me now, everyone on the panel? There you go. So you see the difference. Okay, to the audience, if you all put your headphones on, can everybody hear me? And I've been told to say there is a volume. I didn't realise yesterday. There is a volume kind of dial on the side. If it's not loud enough, try your volume. And if yours kind of runs down, then grab one from next to you, because I think there are others on the seats. So great to see you all back here. I hope you managed to have a really nice lunch break and are enjoying the day so far. I'm really pleased to be going into our first panel of the afternoon. And this is slightly different, I think, from a lot of the panels that we've had over the last day and a half, because this is going to be moving away from maybe some of those conversations about technology itself and about, we've been talking quite a lot about AI, for example, and about digital transformation. And this is very much more focusing on one of those foundational issues in terms of how do you invest? How do you make the right investments for innovation and for transformation? We have a really brilliant panel with us here today. I'm going to follow the same format that I've been following in all of the sessions that I've chaired. So I will do a quick introduction to our 5 speakers here. I will get a conversation going with 1 or 2 questions to our speakers. And then I'm going to come over to you in the audience for your questions. So we'll allow at least half of the session to make sure we bring you in and make it as interactive as possible. Before I start, I just want a show of hands, just for our kind of information, really. Would you say, if you're in the audience, would you say you are part of the finance profession? Okay. Would you say you have decision, if you're not finance itself, would you say you have decision making over investments in where you sit? Okay. Really interesting. Okay, so I think that's similar for a lot of our sessions that we've had. We've got a mix of kind of people and professions in the room. Are any of you from the digital and data professions? Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Right, so in terms of our brilliant panel here today, it's a very international panel as well, which I'm really pleased about. We have Nuruddin Bensouda, who is a friend of Global Government Forum, has been involved in many of our events. And Nuruddin is the General Treasurer of the Kingdom of Morocco, so has come all the way from Morocco to be with us here today. Fantastic to have you here, Nuruddin. Then another big friend of ours, we've got John McCarthy, who is the Chief Economist from the Government of Ireland. So I think you're doing a quick fly-in, fly-out for us here. So really good to have you with us here today, John. Thanks so much. And then we have Peter, I'm just going to make sure I pronounce this as well as I can, Kahigi? Kahigi, fantastic. Thanks, Peter. Peter is the Chief Technology Officer for Centenary Technology Services, a member of the Centenary Group, and advisor to the Ministry of ICT and National Guidance in Uganda. So can very much give us the, not just from Uganda, but I think the perspective from the region as well, which would be fantastic. Thank you. Then we have Karina Singh, who is Director of Function, Profession and Standards, Infrastructure and Projects Authority here in the UK. Really lovely to have you with us, Karina. And then last but by no means least, we've got Adam Millward, who is CEO and co-founder of one of our partners and sponsors today, Metadata Works. Really good to have you all with us. So in terms of kind of setting the scene and the opening question, I'm going to ask all of you really, because it is such an international panel. Maybe our audience don't know as much about you and your organisations as they would with some of our other speakers. Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your current position and maybe what your main responsibilities are? Nuruddin, I'll start with you.
Thank you. So I'm General Treasurer of the Kingdom of Morocco from 2010, about 15 years. And you have served before as Director General of Tax Administration for about 11 years. And during my career, I gave lectures also at the National Administration School in Morocco. And also I have international contribution. I was a chairman of the United Nations Committee of Experts of International Cooperation in Tax Matters, and also served as a member of Permanent Scientific Committee of International Fiscal Association. I have PhD in public law at Sorbonne University in Paris.
Fantastic. And we'll probably dig a bit deeper into your responsibilities in a minute, but what are some of the, off the top of your head, what would you say some of your key responsibilities and challenges maybe are at the moment?
The challenges is to try to understand the politics, players. I mean, all these players are very complicated to understand, and how to implement policies. Sometimes they tell you to reach targets, and in the afternoon they say, why do you do it? So you have to understand, and also you have to try to use all disciplines. I mean, psychology, sociology, economics, politics, history, and try to make arbitration between all these disciplines, and also to understand why people are behaving like this, because we don't have the same target. I mean, when you are civil servant, you are for the long term. You are for this, I mean, let's say for the state targets. For the governments, they are for the mandate. And it switched from liberal to more protective, more intervention in terms of economy. So you have to adapt yourself. And for the case of Morocco, we used to have, let's say, between brackets, Islamic government for about 10 years. And we have to also to adapt ourselves. But I think that to manage this kind of matter, public finance, you have to adapt your behavior and also your mindset to all the, I mean, all these political, majorities which comes with many governments.
It's really interesting that you answered it in that way, because I think that relationship between the civil servants as the stewards, the long-term stewards of national interests, and how they balance that against the political cycles and the demands of any one administration at any particular time is something we don't talk about a lot, because it's quite difficult when you're an impartial civil service to talk about some of those issues. But when it comes to investments and long-term investments, how you deal with those fluctuations is really interesting and really important. So I think that might be an area we can, albeit diplomatically, maybe explore in our conversations. John is taking a steep inhale there. So, John, I'm going to come over to you. Similarly, kind of just give us a sense of what you do and a bit of your background.
Okay. Firstly, it's great to be here, and thanks to Siobhan and colleagues for the invitation. So I'm the chief economist in the Irish Finance Ministry. I would say my role really is twofold. It is to provide advice to the minister on all things economic and fiscal, to support his decision making and the overall government decision making. And secondly, in Ireland, I am responsible for, independent of the minister, to produce two sets of macroeconomic and budgetary forecasts every year, one in spring and one in autumn. We're right in the middle of our spring forecast right now, so it really is a welcome break to come here and to discuss some of these issues today.
And we're obviously having the spring statement today, which
I believe.
I haven't caught up with yet. So
yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. I'm going to come to you in a minute on that macro picture in a minute. But so, Peter, similarly, could you tell us a little bit about what you do and kind of what your key responsibilities are?
Okay, thank you very much. Good to be here, and thank you for having us here. I look after technology for the Centenary Group, as you said, which is the largest financial group in Uganda and one of the largest in the region. But for 25 years before that, I was holding many senior roles in the government responsible for digital transformation. So I used to be in charge of technology, information services, cybersecurity, and things like that. So because of that long history, I was retained to be an advisor to the ministry. And maybe the third hat and the last one that I can talk about is for the last 11 years, I've been a member of the panel of experts at the Global Cybersecurity Capacity Center at the University of Oxford. So I spend a lot of time doing that also. We help governments in the Commonwealth to improve their capability, maturity level on cybersecurity. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. So you are helping to share some of that learning as well through the work that you do.
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Thank you. And Karina, I think some people might be really interested in particular about the authority and the work of the authority, because maybe they're not as familiar with that as a body.
Indeed. Hello. Hi, everyone. Really nice to be here. Thank you to be invited. I'm Karina Singh. I'm Director at the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, currently based at the Cabinet Office, and we will be part of the Treasury come next week, and we will be NISTA, the National Infrastructure and Service Transformation Authority. So yeah, we're changing, John. So my role there is threefold. First of all is to look at, so basically we are the people who are the guardians of the standard of how we do project delivery in government. And we then also help and advise all the people across government who do project delivery. There are over 250 very complex and risky projects that we support with a whole life cost of over 800 billion pounds.
Wow.
So quite a challenge there. My role in particular is to look after the people elements. So there are over 22,000 people who are involved in delivering projects across government. My job is to make sure that they've got access to the right training, the right standards, and the capability uplift we need so that we are confident in how we deliver. Secondly, it's about the standards. So how do we make sure that we have we can articulate what good looks like, what good practice looks like, and that is within my team as well. And finally, which is why I'm really pleased to be on this panel, is we look after all the data, all the project data as well. So we are technically, I suppose, sitting on the largest amount of project data in the UK, because over 100 billion pounds of capital investment every year by the government, and all of that is used through the supply chain. And how do we then make sure that we understand where that is being spent, how that's being spent, and are we spending it as clearly and wisely as possible as we can for the taxpayer? So a very varied role, and interested to be in part of this
fantastic, thanks.
conversation.
And data and the importance of data and managing it and using it better has been a theme that's been running throughout the 2 days.
Indeed.
And it's a brilliant segue into asking Adam what you do, a little bit about metadata work, so what your key role and responsibilities are.
Thank you, and yeah, nice to see everyone here. So I'm co-founder of Metadata Works, and we're essentially a fair data company. So we're trying to make data more findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. I guess I saw some hands up about data people in the audience. Do we have any data engineers in here? We've got none.
By yourself, Adam.
I'm by myself. So I came from a data engineering background, and what they always used to say about data engineers is that, how do you tell the difference between an introvert and an extrovert data engineer? And it's that an extrovert data engineer looks at your shoes when he's talking to you. And I think that's what I found on a lot of the data projects we worked on. There were fantastic data assets across lots of the projects we worked with, but people weren't necessarily very good at telling other people about them. And because they weren't very good at making people aware of that data, it wasn't getting used. So as a company, that's what we focus on, and that's what we're passionate about. And we work with lots of public sector organizations to do exactly that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So I hope that set the scene a little bit in terms of kind of who our speakers are and what their backgrounds are and what they're currently doing. John, I'm going to come to you for the first follow-up question. So this is all about how do people know they're making the right decisions for investment. So as an economist here on the panel, what do you think are the main considerations that officials need to bear in mind when they are deciding how much, when, where do they invest in innovation particularly?
Okay, really relevant question. Let me come at it from a treasury perspective, and I suppose when we get requests for investment in digital, investment in AI, and an investment in innovation, our first question is always to ask, why the public sector? Why not the private sector? Where is the market failure, etc.? And I suppose in the case of investment in digital, I think it's crystal clear that there are certainly positive externalities at work here. There's certainly a role for improving productivity, including in the public sector. There is a scope to improve spatial planning, regional planning, quality of life issues, etc. So digital can affect all these. So I do think there is a role for public investment here. The next question then we would think of, well, if there's a role for the public sector, how can we design the sort of investment that we can mobilize more and more private sector, how we can crowd in private sector investment. And I think two elements are important. One is the public sector can provide certainty, but also the public sector can get involved in de-risking various projects. Now, when I'm talking about de-risking, I'm not talking about taking the risk onto the public sector balance sheet. I'm talking about prioritizing projects that can crowd in private sector investment. So to give you an example, in Ireland, we've lots of companies that are looking to get into the digital space, into data centers, etc. But there's a problem with energy supply in Ireland. We've had rapid economic recovery. We've had years of underinvestment in grid, in generation, etc. So there are issues regarding security of energy supply. So if we can invest in that particular area, invest in generation and in transmission, that can kind of de-risk private investment. The other issue that we would think about quite a lot then, and this will come as no surprise in any finance ministry, is how this investment is financed. If it's investment through deficit financed, that raises all sorts of issues. The demand for investable funds will rise. If the supply of investable funds is fixed, then simply the interest rate is going to rise and you're going to crowd out some private investment. If it's done through higher taxation, that's going to have an impact on incentives, etc., an impact on the supply side of the economy by potentially reducing the amount of capital, the amount of labour. So I think it comes back then to the issue of trade-offs. If investment in digital, investment in AI is a priority, what is going to be deprioritised, so to speak? And then again, this will come as no surprise to colleagues. In any treasury, and including my own, we will think about how can we maximise the rate of return. What are the supporting factors? What's the supporting ecosystem that can improve the rate of return on taxpayers' funds? And here I'm talking about regulation, getting the right balance. I'm talking about security. I'm talking about, and this is very relevant in Ireland, I'm talking about planning. Because planning is a real bottleneck to investment. It's adding dramatically to the cost of all forms of investment in Ireland. To give you an example, with some of our mega projects, the planning process is now encompassing the legal process. So all of the big firms are taking on senior counsel, I think you call it in the UK, King's Counsel, at the start of the process, adding obviously to input costs and reducing the return on the investment. So getting planning right is certainly part of ensuring the value for money for the taxpayer. And then the final area just to mention then are the sort of complementary policies in the labour space. So we're talking about improving the stock of capital, public and private capital, but what about the impact on labour? Do you have the necessary skills, training to be able to use these technologies? But there's another dimension there as well, Siobhan, and that's we've seen sort of turbocharging of digitalisation after the pandemic. And that is certainly having disruptive impacts on the labour market. Some people are being forced out of jobs. And I think that's likely to continue as AI becomes more and more important. So what happens to people who lose their jobs? How do they transition to jobs or occupations that will no longer exist because of these technologies into new areas? So there's some of the issues that we're thinking about from an economic perspective in the Finance Ministry.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. I knew you would set that scene for us really well, that kind of big overarching picture. So lots of those issues, I'm sure we have questions already around if you are going to invest in innovation, in digital transformation, how will you fund it? Who will pay for it? How do you crowdsource in from the private sector? Create the conditions for the private sector to be part of this investment as well. what value for money can you guarantee the public? And then that skills picture, again, the skills is an issue that's come up a lot, I think, in our conversations already. Thanks so much. And on that kind of macro picture then, Peter, I'm going to come to you.
Sure.
In terms of kind of tech development then in Uganda and maybe in the broader region, would you say that the investment has been successful, and what impact has it had in terms of investment in kind of innovative technologies?
Yeah, absolutely. So I need to let you know that I used to work for the Ministry of Finance maybe about 13 years ago as a CIO. So most of my work was quoting people like John and Nordin
Thank
to
you.
understand to understand why they need to give me resources to do my work. And I just want to encourage everybody who's here that if you find that you're not getting enough support, my advice is it is you who's not explaining well.
Right.
Because the people who handle the pass need to make the decisions based on many demands. The demands are this big, the pass is this big. So that's the issue. So in our case, we made some mistakes about 25 years ago when I joined the government. So we started putting the cart before the horse. We tried to do some digital services in revenue collection and also in the criminal justice system. But when we did, we discovered we didn't have enough infrastructure across the country to allow all the systems to collaborate. So about 15 years ago, we took a step back, did a strategy, and started moving sequentially because we had started getting cases where people were contesting digital decisions because there was no regulatory framework to support them. So we took a step back, did the regulatory framework, we had all the laws in place, and then we got the infrastructure, the data centers that John is talking about, and all these networks to connect the different buildings. Now, going back to your question, because now in Uganda there are about 6,000 public sector digital services, and they're all running. If you want to come to Uganda, you can apply for a visa online. Everything is pretty much online. But now the key issue is, do all these systems talk to each other? Some of them others maybe not. Is it possible to get smarter ways of using that data to make us do more with less? So those are the kind of things that we're grappling with right now. And I was really, really, really excited to hear that the UK is grappling with some of the problems that Uganda is grappling with, borders between one department and another department, the struggle for mandate and things like that. So I was comforted that it's pretty much the same thing. But I think we've really, really moved fast. And I would say that right now we understand better than we did many years ago when the Treasury is telling us prioritize what are the 2 or 3 things that will make us jump from 1 meter to 12 meters as opposed to trying doing everything. So I'm sure the finance guys here are really happy to hear an IT guy speak like this. Because before we used to fight all the time, but now we understand it. Thank you.
Well, that's been the theme as well that's come out, is that kind of common language between different professions as well, and how can you find that common ground? And I think I will come back to this issue of the business case for investment in technology. I think that's really key to some of this. But, okay, thanks so much. And then, Nuruddin, I'm going to come to you as well. So I know that Morocco, building on what Peter said about needing the infrastructure and the kind of the strategy in place, the broader strategy in place, I think in Morocco you have a digital strategy in place, Morocco 2030. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. But does that cover the issue of investment in technology?
Yes, for sure. I would like just to say that what John and Peter said, we find the same questions in Morocco. But about our strategy, the Morocco has strategy 2030, which had been adopted. And the objectives were to digitizing public services to better serve citizens and business. It's something which is obvious in many countries. And second one is boosting digital economy by fostering Moroccan digital solutions, generating value and creating jobs, as you mentioned, John. So 4 priorities, because it's necessary: developing digital skills, strengthening digital infrastructure, promoting startups, supporting AI development. In this strategy, we emphasize digital inclusion to make digital services more accessible to all citizens. But as you know, we need infrastructure. We have to take all of these things together at the same time and make arbitration in terms of budget, because you have to make arbitration between infrastructures and also digitals, human resources. I will come back to human resources, which is very important. And the idea as an open economy, we have to attract foreign investors. And this is our strategy. And also, what we have learned from yesterday is to collaborate, to have this coordination and harmonization of public policies.
Fantastic. So in your strategy, as you say, some of the key things are around job creation, so stimulating the economy, the benefits of doing this digital transformation are kind of factored in to that digital strategy.
Yeah,
so
for
again,
sure.
thanks, Noureddin. And just to say, I'm going to ask 2 more questions and then I'm coming over to you, the audience, so have your great questions ready in a couple of minutes. But Adam, in terms of what you've heard there, my question to you, I guess, is sitting outside the public sector a little bit, do you think public servants could be better at putting the business case for investment in transformation? And also, do they value, as you said, do they value the power of data enough in that business case?
I think in some cases, but in some cases they can probably definitely do better. I think I was at a conference last week and they were talking about making sure that we don't make the measurable important, but we make the important measurable. And I think often when we're looking at the foundations behind data, things like standards, they're not necessarily that, sexy, and it's not necessarily that easy to measure the benefit of that immediately, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be in some ways trying to measure it. And we often work with organizations, and as part of that business case, it's often difficult to ultimately easily measure the benefit of something like standards. I do see there is a change, even coming to these conferences now. People are talking about data discovery, they're talking about standardization, things like the National Data Library, for instance. Quantifying how beneficial a library would be in terms of books might be hard. I think it's the same around data, but I think the conversation is definitely changing. I think that would be where I would ask the public sector to help, because I talk to people all the time and I say, okay, well, how do you measure the benefit of a standard? How can we measure the benefit of sharing a particular data set when the outcome is so much further down the line? And a good example can be in publications. So in the academic circles, if you publish a paper, it can be used by lots and lots of other academics. And what they do is they cite your paper, and that's how you get recognition. And it's taken a long time for that kind of process to happen. And I think exactly the same thing needs to happen with data. If, as a government organization, you make data accessible and people do use it, you need to get some kind of credit for that. So that's one initiative that I would say would be really, really good to see across government, so we can start to measure the benefit of these types of investments.
And I guess picking up on both something Noureddin and John said, there's also the issue of how governments create the environment that's conducive to the private sector to innovate as well, isn't there? And you may or may not have thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, definitely. So we're in the scale-up territory, so we've been going 5 years. I think as a startup, it is often difficult to work with government. In a way, I'm lucky because I've been part of lots of NHS projects and ran the data architecture for the 100,000 Genome Project. So I had a bit of a network that let us talk to government, talk to the NHS, and that gave us an in. I think when I talk to other startups who are trying to deploy technology in government, there's a very, very risk-averse attitude towards bringing in new technology. And I think you need to be careful with public money, but I think having, I think sometimes the scales are tipped really against those startups trying to come in and innovate. And again, I think there are programs that are having a lot of success. So making synthetic data available, that's really, really great, because that means that a startup can go in, they can build out a proof of concept, even if they're not connected to a particular organization, and then they can demonstrate the value early. But I think definitely that kind of startup connection is there are interventions, but I think more work could potentially be done in that area as well.
Can I say a word about this? For example, in Morocco, we designed a new regulation in terms of procurement. The classical one is public procurement, but since we have to take in consideration startups and all the companies which are dynamic, there is what we call the spontaneous supply. So any enterprises can come to see the public sector and offer a new technology, innovation, and proposal, so to achieve or to make something new. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I know in the UK very conscious of trying to make that procurement process itself easier. I think for SMEs in particular. Karina, my final question, follow-up question to you, and then I'm coming to the audience. So. Given, I mean, you sit in one of these government bodies, as you say, you're going to become part of the Treasury. You don't have a bottomless pot of money, and as we've heard, there are lots of demands on resources. So how would you, what would your thinking be on how you prioritise investment in innovation? Like, how do you value innovation compared to all of the other things that you have to spend money on?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question. So, as I mentioned earlier, we probably sit on the most amount of project data in the country, but we can't access it because, of course, it's sitting in little data puddles all over the supply chain. So a tier 3 supplier will have their own bits of data that relate to a project. Same with a tier 2 supplier and the prime, etc. And a little bit of that, a sliver of that information will come to us. How do we join up all of that data so that we can actually create a common good? And that's the mindset that I've definitely brought to this, is building on John's point as well. What is the market failure? What is the thing that nobody else will do? What can we do as government to create the conditions for success? And we decided to recognise that we won't be at the forefront of innovation because the startups and other people will be better at that than us. But what we can do is focus on the foundation of piece, and the three things that we're focused on is absolutely project data. You'll data standards, you'll be very pleased to hear. So we are creating a common project data standard, which doesn't exist at the moment, which will allow us then to use the data, collect the data, and then use the data to create common good. And we're working closely with the National Data Library as well about then and thinking about how we can release that and how we can share that. And if you want to hear more about the project data standard, Ben, who's sitting here, is doing a session after this, particularly on the project data standard. So it's been really interesting and really exciting for us to bring the community together and recognise that it doesn't exist at the moment, and how we do that. The second thing that has also been mentioned is around skills. So as government, do we have the right skills we need to make the use of data and AI, not just in our projects, in what we are doing on a day-to-day basis, but also when we are procuring, and when we are asking for things, are we an intelligent enough client around data and AI? And the short answer is no. So that is the second big stream of work that we are focused on, is creating, thinking deeply and carefully once for all the departments to use. And we know that our capability framework that we create is also used across the country by smaller suppliers, by SMEs as well. So, again, a common good for people to use. So we're refreshing our capability framework to incorporate what does good data and AI skills look like. Thirdly, what we're doing about how do you create value is around experiments. And we all know that we are buying supplies from a number of colleagues across the world, and they are obviously selling us data and AI products, and we know that various departments are experimenting with those products to say, I'm not going to mention any names, but what can this product do for us? What could that product do for us? But then how do we share that information across us as government, and how do we then take what might be a startup innovation idea in one department and say, this would apply in this other department as well. So, for example, if somebody's experimenting to say, I can create a first draft of a business case for you in half an hour that used to take 3 weeks, that's really great, and we can see that can apply to everybody. Then how do we do the scaling up? And this is the challenge that we've got. And so we're trying to think about how do you then do that scaling up so that you're seeding a good idea everywhere across government. So those are the things that we're focused on. The foundational things is data standards, skills, and then experimenting together.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Right, I'm coming over to the audience. Who has... Yes, we have a question down here at the front. If you could put your hand up, that would be great so they can see. And then if anyone has the next question, if you put your hand up, I think we've got 2 mics as well in the room. Thank you.
Good afternoon all. My name's Andrew. I come from the Government Digital Service. So I basically the best audience I can, because I work with Treasury and to a certain extent IPA, Koenig and Tenista, on how we actually fund digital and innovation. So I'm going to try and outsource my own job, because I've got some questions and we think we have some answers, and if you want to hear about it, we're doing a talk later. But
Well, this is just a publicity. This is just PR for the next session.
But if I paraphrase some of the kind of conversations, we've got lots of demands and a small purse. We are risk averse by nature, and we want to see the value for money. We almost want to guarantee value for money for the taxpayer, and rightly so. Does that mean that we are set up to never fund innovation? Because by funding innovation, there is an element of uncertainty in there, and can that uncertainty work with the principles of everything else that I've just covered? And if so, how do we make that happen?
I really like that question. John, I'm going to come back to you, because you're you set out very well those kind of key considerations in investment. And I think that, how do you build a business case around innovation when the outcomes are uncertain, when you are necessarily going to be experimenting maybe with something? So are you ever going to get a serious economist like yourself going, yep, I love that project, I'm going to give you some funding for that project?
So let me answer that maybe in a way you may not expect me to answer. I would say from an Irish perspective, and I'm talking purely from an Irish perspective, digital is absolutely crucial. And I'm going to answer it from an economic perspective, the reason why that's the case. If you think of Paul Krugman, so he won the Nobel Prize in Economics in the 1990s for his new economic geography. Why does production take place where? Okay, so typically it was on the basis of agglomerations. So you'd have heavy manufacturing taking place close to the market. So distance to market was really important. From an Irish perspective, stuck in the mid-Atlantic, geographically peripheral, etc. Okay, we boosted our living standards by being able to produce goods and services that were independent of distance to market. In other words, we started producing software, data, lots of digital stuff that could be exported to anywhere in the world with zero transport costs. So when people come to me and or the department, this sort of investment is seen as high priority. What we do say, however, is yes, it's a priority, but not everything can be a priority. I work in the civil service, and in the Treasury, and I'm sure Nuruddin and others will say, every department comes to us and says, everything is a priority. Well, by definition, if everything's a priority, nothing is a priority. From my perspective, digital is a key part of our business model. It's a key part of how our income standards have improved, and it is a priority. But what I would say is, yes, but deprioritize something else.
Right, thanks. We've got another question here, but does anyone else want to come in, add anything to what John said, or should we go to the next? We'll go to the next question. Over here, thanks. I'm just saying we are going to finish on time at 2:30, because I know people have got other sessions as well.
Thank you. Do you think we make the right balance between what we produce in-house in the public sector and what we're having to procure from the private sector insofar as digital solutions, both in the UK but also across Uganda, Ireland and Morocco?
Thank you. So have you got the balance right? Nuruddin, come to you on that.
Yeah, I would like to say that there is some application or some investment that you do in-house, but it is necessary to collaborate and cooperate with private sector, because we don't have all human resources to develop all technology, and we need the participation of private sectors.
Do you think sometimes we are too slow to, while we are bringing in expertise which we need from the private sector, are we too slow to build our own capability at the same time?
We have to develop our own, but there is something which is important: sovereignty, because you have data and you have to keep an eye on it. you have severity inside, in your country, and also when you are dealing with outside, because sometimes when you have some application or all these digital things that you don't master, it's done away from your home, and you don't protect your sovereignty.
Right. Peter, did you want the balance in Uganda? Do you think it's right?
I think we've suffered that problem for a long time until about 4 years ago. We started something that we call a national innovation support program, which was allowing young people, because the literacy levels had gone up, ICT literacy levels had gone up. So we allowed young people to develop applications. We did hit some headwinds in doing that because our business registration and our public procurement is designed by local young people. But we did hit some headwinds because we didn't know then, do we take the source code away from them, the IP? Do we pay them some money every year like we would do for other people like AWS, Oracle, and everybody else? So I think that even though we benefited, we sort of gave them a raw deal. And that's something that you need to be careful about in the public sector. If you want people to innovate internally, you need to motivate them appropriately as you would people outside. Thank you.
Thanks.
Can I say something more?
Yeah, sure.
It's about silos. Sometimes there are a lot of investments in many departments, and there is no communication. And maybe you pay a lot of things, but there is no interoperability between the systems.
Yeah.
The integration is very important, and as you know, there is author, the name is Mariana Mazzucato, that you know very well, and she shows that the problem, especially on the COVID-19, there were no communication between a department, and we have a bad situation.
Yeah. John, you wanted to come in?
I mean, just very briefly on the question. I mean, in an Irish context, what I would worry about is we do tend to outsource a lot of it to the private sector, given relative wages between public and private sector in that space. But what we're supposed to do when we outsource is there is supposed to be technology transfer. Okay, there's supposed to be skills transfer. So if I outsource something to somebody, I'm supposed to know how to do it the next time, so we don't have to do it. Unfortunately, that doesn't really work in practice. There's a kind of continuous process of outsourcing. So I would say the balance is right, but it could be tilted more in the favor of public sector if you had more technology transfer over time.
Yeah, Adam.
Could I come in and just add, I guess there's a bit of also complexity when we go into these situations where there's capital spend, which can go into building new stuff. And quite often you've got very innovative companies who have software as a service, which is a revenue cost and is part of an ongoing function. And what we see quite often is we're coming up against still outsourced, so you're using the major kind of outsources out there to build stuff for the public sector that is actually out there as software as a service. There's a tool out there that's already, that already does the job, and then you wouldn't have the maintenance cost that would go year on year on year. And I think that there is a bit of a caveat there, complexity there, where you end up spending, twice as much to build it because you've got a capital budget and you have to spend that. So I think that's also something that's quite tricky that we come up against again. And I would hope there would be a bit of a shift as well across government.
We are pretty much out of time, but Karina, one thought on, we've been talking about the missions, and obviously this government has its 5 missions. Do you think those missions will see a different way of funding? Are we going to see less horizontal, more horizontal, less kind of vertical funding streams? Will that make a difference in the way innovation is funded, do you think?
I think so. And I think, we haven't got there yet on how missions are going to be funded, but I can see that shift of thinking and how we're going to oversee that. What does that mean for accountability? Where the money goes? How does the money flow when you've got several departments and then local authorities and other companies who are all then trying to pull in the same direction to deliver a mission? Fascinating and really good in concept, but we're still trying to work out how that works in practice.
So maybe we'll come back next year and see if the
Absolutely.
missions have made a difference in terms of funding.
Yes.
Please join me in a big round of applause for our fantastic panel. Thank you so much again to the audience for all your questions. You've got until 4 o'clock, I think, to get to your next session. I'm going to head over to, no, you've got until 3:30 to get to your next session. I'm going to head over to that stage over there for not even 3:30. What am I talking about? You've got 10 minutes to get to your next session, and I'll be going over there to talk all things data, so carrying on from here, but there are other great sessions going on here as well. Thanks, everybody. God, I'm losing track.